Welcome back to the Scoop on Supplements and the Sleep Stress Cycle series. Last episode, Tahya of Bosmora and Raffaele of 1H Scripts introduced us to the bidirectional loop between stress and sleep. Today, we go deeper into the stress side of that equation, specifically the hormone at the center of it all, cortisol. Cortisol has a reputation problem. Most people hear it and think bad hormone something to eliminate, but as you're about to learn, that's not the right framing. Cortisol is essential. The problem isn't cortisol, it's dysregulation. And by the end of this episode, you'll understand exactly what that means, how it happens, and what you can do about it, including some powerful adaptogenic supplements that Raffaele has worked with extensively through his formulations at 1H Scripts.
Raffaele, I want to start with the one question I get all the time. Someone reads that cortisol is the stress hormone and decides they need to lower it. You buy some supplement that someone told them to reduce cortisol. Is that the right approach?
Almost never. And that framing drives me a little crazy, honestly, because it leads people to try to suppress something their body genuinely needs. The question isn't how do I lower my cortisol? It's how do I get my cortisol to do what it's supposed to do when it's supposed to do it?
Exactly. And that's the distinction between a hormone being elevated at the wrong time versus just being elevated. It's something that gets lost in the wellness space constantly. Let's actually explain the system. So let's walk through the HPA axis that we touched on in the last episode, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. When your brain perceives a stressor, the hypothalamus releases corticotropin-releasing hormone, which signals the pituitary to release ACTH, which is adrenocorticotropic hormone, and that travels to the adrenal glands sitting on top of your kidneys and triggers cortisol release. Now, cortisol does a lot of things that are genuinely useful. It mobilizes glucose for energy. It has anti-inflammatory effects in the short term, it sharpens focus, it helps it regulate immune function. In the morning, a healthy cortisol surge, called the cortisol awakening response, is actually what helps you feel alert and functional. The problem is that this system was designed for acute threats. You run from the predator, cortisol spikes, you survive, it drops back down. What makes it problematic is sustained low-grade stress, the kind that modern life is absolutely full of.
And what I see in practice, working with people on their health protocols, is that sustained version looks very different from acute stress. It's not dramatic. It's the person who feels tired but can't wind down, who gets a second wind at 10 p.m. when they should be sleeping, who wakes up at 3 a.m. with their mind racing. That's dysregulated cortisol, not high cortisol, but cortisol in the wrong place at the wrong time. The circadian rhythm of cortisol is supposed to look like a wave. High in the morning, tapering through the day, very low by evening. Chronic stress flattens that wave. You end up with a blunted morning peak and elevated evening levels. And that's exactly the pattern that wrecks sleep.
From a clinical standpoint, this flattened cortisol curve has been associated with burnout, chronic fatigue, impaired immune function, and metabolic dysregulation. It's not just about feeling stress, it has downstream consequences across almost every system in the body. And what's particularly important for our audience, this pattern becomes more common with age, partly because the HPA axis becomes less responsive and less efficient at resetting. So the 45 to 60-year-old who feels like they used to be able to handle more, that's partly biology, not weakness.
This is where I want to introduce the category of supplements I find most relevant to cortisol dysregulation, adaptogens. And I want to be precise about what the word actually means because it gets thrown around loosely. An adaptogen is a plant compound that helps the body adapt to stress, specifically by modulating the HPA axis response. They don't suppress cortisol, they help normalize it, bringing down what's chronically elevated and supporting the response when it's needed. The two that I work with and that have the strongest evidence base are Ashwagandha and Rhodiola, and they're meaningfully different. They're not interchangeable.
Let's start with ashwagandha, Withania somnifera. The evidence here is actually quite solid for a botanical. Multiple randomized controlled trials have shown significant reductions in serum cortisol levels, perceived stress scores, and sleep quality in chronically stressed adults. The mechanism involves withanolides, the active compounds of ashwagandha, which appear to modulate the HPA axis and may have GABAergic activity, which contributes to the calming effect. Dosing in the clinical trials typically runs 300 to 600 milligrams of a standardized extract daily. And a couple of important clinical notes here. Ashwagandha is generally well tolerated, but it has thyroid stimulating activity. So, people on thyroid medication or with thyroid conditioners should check with their healthcare provider before using it. Also, ashwagandha taken beyond 2 to 3 months can contribute to some users feeling overly drowsy or emotionally flat due to its adaptogenic properties. So the data recommends 2 to 3 months on, 2 to 4 weeks off.
And that clinical nuance is exactly why having Tahya's background in the room is so valuable. Those are the things that don't make it onto the supplement label. Now Rhodiola Rosea, is different. I think of ashwagandha as the settle down adaptogen, and rhodiola as the get up and go adaptogen. Rhodiola is particularly effective for mental fatigue and performance under stress. It's been studied in students during exam periods, in military personnel, and in shift workers. At 1H Scripts, when I'm thinking about someone's protocol, I think, are you more wired and tired, or are you exhausted and depleted? Ashwagandha tends to serve the first profile better, whereas rhodiola tends to serve the second.
That's a really useful heuristic. And Bosmora's formulation philosophy operates the same way. Every ingredient is chosen for a specific mechanism, not just because it's popular. When we look at adaptogens for our products, the question is always, what is this person's specific physiological need? We should also mention magnesium here briefly, because magnesium plays a supporting role in adrenal function and the HPA axis regulation. Magnesium deficiency, which is remarkably common in the US, has been shown to amplify cortisol response to stress. We'll go much deeper on magnesium in the sleep episodes, but it's worth flagging here because it interacts with everything.
That's episode 2 of the sleep stress cycle. The key takeaway: cortisol isn't your enemy, dysregulation is. And adaptogens like ashwagandha and rhodiola offer a meaningful, evidence-supported way to begin restoring your cortisol rhythm. Next week, we flip to the sleep side of the cycle and go inside your brain at night, what's actually happening during different sleep stages, why deep sleep is the most undervalued health tool most people are ignoring, and which supplements support the architecture of real restorative sleep. Links in the show notes. Bosmora.com for Tahya's science-formulated supplement line, and 1hscripts.com for Raffaele's protocols and homeopathic formulations. See you next week.